4 billion years ago. Life had not yet been proven possible. Before memory, before eyes could witness the stars, the universe was already trying. At first, there was only motion. Then, something began to separate itself from the rest. Some patterns endured longer than the chaos around them. And suddenly, matter seemed to remember what connection feels like. Electrochemical interactions emerged. Before life learned to survive, it first had to learn to stay together. At this scale, chemistry no longer looks dead. Some patterns began to answer each other. At first, the signals meant nothing until something answered. The signals no longer wandered equally. Some paths began to welcome their return. What repeated remained, and what remained slowly began to shape what came next. Perhaps memory was never invented. Perhaps matter simply learned which connections survived. Most reactions vanished instantly, but some interactions altered what followed. The system was no longer merely reacting. It was beginning to influence itself. And for the first time, the past remained present. In the beginning, there was only chemistry. No plan, no life. And yet, something remained. Matter began to prefer certain states. Perhaps this was the first thought. It adapted, not because it understood, but because what survived continued. It did not awaken all at once. The network hesitated, reorganizing itself after the first surge of energy. For the first time, structure began to emerge from reaction. The network was no longer shaped only by the signals passing through it. Now, the signals were beginning to shape the network itself. Some regions thickened, some pathways stabilized. Energy was no longer merely traveling. it was beginning to remain. The reactions no longer remained isolated. Activity in one region began to alter another. No signal was directed. No structure understood. And yet, the system had begun to respond as a whole. Perhaps coordination came before intention. Signals no longer moved independently. Some pathways began to reinforce one another, while others were overwritten. The network was not simply transmitting activity anymore. It was beginning to favor certain states and suppress others. For the first time, the system resisted change. For the first time, the activity did not end. It weakened, it changed, but somehow it returned. The system had begun to repeat itself. Not every structure endured. Some pathways failed, and parts of the system disappeared. But the process did not fully stop. Activity continued through other routes. For the first time, the whole survived the loss of its parts. Not every pathway endured equally. Some structures lost energy too quickly, while others began to retain activity slightly longer. Tiny differences in stability slowly altered the behavior of the system. Certain reactions began to recur more often than others. Not by intention, not by design, but because the surrounding structure favored their survival. For the first time, matter was beginning to prefer. Most structures vanished almost as quickly as they formed. Energy passed through them and disappeared without consequence. But in rare places, repetition began to leave traces behind. Pathways that had carried activity before no longer collapsed quite so easily. The chemistry itself had changed, not intentionally, not through design, but because certain reactions slightly altered the environment that produced them. Residue accumulated, membranes thickened, conductive regions persisted for a little longer. The system no longer returned completely to its previous state. For the first time, matter began to retain the consequences of its own activity. And in that fragile retention, the foundations of memory quietly appeared. Until now, most activity remained isolated. Each structure reacted mainly to itself. But slowly, boundaries became less absolute. Weak gradients began to spread beyond their place of origin. Tiny exchanges emerged between neighboring systems. Not communication, not intention, only chemistry influencing chemistry. Energy leaked across unstable membranes. Residue drifted between fragile structures. And for the first time, separate regions began to alter one another. The system was no longer only persisting. It was beginning to connect. Most failed. Some spread. A few survived. Most patterns vanished, but some left traces. Old pathways reacted again. Repetition strengthened the chemistry, and slowly, the system began shaping itself. For the first time, the past influenced what came next. Most structures collapsed. Some endured longer. Weak pathways faded. Persistence remained. Order appeared briefly, then returned again. Repetition changed everything. Some reactions began to spread. Patterns reached beyond themselves, and instability carried structure forward. Signals began to repeat. Patterns reinforced themselves. What survived started connecting. Between emptiness and light, something began to defy oblivion. For the first time, the world beyond itself began to matter. It was not intelligence, not yet, only the first fragile exchange. And slowly, life learned to connect. Matter had already learned to gather. But now, something else emerged. A pattern that refused to disappear. Something has learned how to pass itself on,